morning, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Trump actions blockade in the Strait of Hormuz and says Iran wants a deal very badly. Lebanon enters talks with Israel in Washington today, but Hezbollah says it's pointless. And Pope Leo starts Africa tour in Algeria and calls for peace in the Middle East. First this morning, the US blockade of Iranian ports is now in effect after US President Donald Trump announced this course of action after failed talks in Islamabad on Saturday. Maritime traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has now come to a halt that some experts say could negatively impact international markets. However, Western allies have refused to join in on the plan.
Tensions are rapidly escalating in the Middle East as Donald Trump orders a sweeping US naval blockade targeting Iranian ports. Trump warned that any Iranian vessels approaching US forces in the Strait of Hormuz would be immediately eliminated, signaling a major escalation in military posture. According to United States Central Command, the blockade began Monday, restricting all maritime traffic to and from Iranian ports, while allowing passage for ships not linked to Iran. Iran has responded with strong warnings. Officials say their armed forces are on maximum alert, vowing a decisive response to any aggression. Tehran has also accused Washington of piracy as protests erupted in the capital. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu expressed support for the US move, saying Israel is closely coordinating with Washington and warning a fragile ceasefire could soon collapse. US Vice President J.D. Vance said the path forward depends on Iran, urging Tehran to abandon nuclear ambitions and reopen the strait fully to global trade.
Is that we need to see the Straits of Hormuz fully open. And this is frankly one of the things where the Iranians tried to move the goalposts during the negotiation. We made very clear that that's unacceptable. We came to the negotiation saying the United States, what we've given here is a ceasefire. We've stopped bombing the country. What we expect the Iranians to give up is a full reopening of the Straits of Hormuz. We have seen, as the president has said, some significant uptick in traffic coming through the Straits of Hormuz. That's good for the global economy.
Despite rising tensions, NATO allies, including Britain and France, have declined to participate in the blockade, instead pushing for diplomatic efforts to reopen the critical shipping route, which carries roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply. As both sides dig in, concerns are mounting over the risk of wider conflict and its impact on global energy markets.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day, and we head first to the New York Times website in relation to Iran and Lebanon. So Iran proposes suspending nuclear activity for up to 5 years. Now this information has just come out during what was discussed over in the talks that they had, US and Iran, in Islamabad on Saturday. However, this was rejected by the US, that particular proposal, because Donald Trump says that the US actually wants 20 years suspension of any nuclear activity. But just to go through those top lines that you would have just heard in the first report, Donald Trump has said that Iran wants to make a deal and that he will not come to any agreement that allows Tehran to have a nuclear weapon in whatever capacity. Now, Iran has said on Monday that it could suspend its uranium enrichment program, as I mentioned, for up to 5 years was what they were saying, but the US has rejected that particular proposal, and that's coming from US and Iran officials in relation to that. Now, Trump has said that talks have hit a roadblock, which is why he's decided to put put a blockade of ships transitioning the Strait of Hormuz and has started that on Monday night, yesterday. So we're going to definitely see the ramifications of what that actually means, especially for Iran. So we know that a number of their ports have now been blocked, and Iran does use that to transport oil and different things in relation to that, especially with China as well acting as one of the ones that they shipped out to. But this morning this evening, Trump said that Iran had called them to say they would like to make a deal, but that information actually hasn't been confirmed, and we know that Trump has made a number of claims in relation to what he says Iran has said to him about this deal and a disagreement and the conflict happening within the Middle East. Now, US President Donald Trump has also warned that any Iranian vessels that breach Monday's newly enforced US blockade will immediately be eliminated. But Iran's parliamentary speaker said that the country will not surrender under any threats that are imposed by Trump's remarks. So we know that there is a number of back and forth. We also know that there's going to be another meeting, hopefully, between the two sides in order to broker up some form of a peace deal back in Pakistan. But we'll bring you some information in relation to that later on in the program. But just swiftly moving to staying on Lebanon, just because they're going to be meeting later on today in regards to the Lebanon and Israel conflict. Now, the head of Hezbollah has called Lebanon on Monday to pull out of direct talks because he does not feel that this is going to be a good use of time. He thinks it's a waste of time and has said that it is pointless. Now, that was Naeem Qasem speaking on televised address on Monday, saying that he refuses negotiations with any Israeli entity. So we will definitely provide you with information because that meeting, as far as we know, is still going ahead. Now let's move to the next story today, and that's on the BBC website in relation to what's going on in Peru. Now, yesterday we did report on this, saying that they are holding elections and it has had to be extended because Peru elections dragged into second day after ballot delivery fiasco. They've had a number of issues with people from home and abroad trying to put in their ballots in relation to the elections in Peru, which has now been delayed. So that's impacted tens of thousands of people who were unable to vote, and they're saying it's because of technical and logistical problems at several polling stations. Now, the electoral authorities have granted a one-day extension to more than 50,000 voters who could not cast their ballots on Sunday. So it's likely that it's gone into today, but we'll keep you updated as to exactly how that is looking. But a preliminary count of half the votes that were cast put Conservative candidate Keiko Fujimori slightly ahead of the right-wing former Mayor Rafael Lopez Aliaga. And all the candidates are far short of the 50% of votes needed to win outright, making it's likely that they're going to have a runoff between the top two candidates on the 7th of June. And what you're seeing here, just in regards to Peru, what is very interesting, that Peru has had 8 presidents in the last 10 years. So there's been a number of political changes in the country, which is really looking for stability right now. And the last one was only in there for 5 days. That was Manuel. That was in 2020. And if we go scroll all the way down to today, I believe the last president that was there, that was kicked out, that was Jose Geri as well. There we are, July 2025 to February 2026, lasting 131 days in office, which is why these elections have come around quite quickly in regards to that. Now, there is an interim president, that is Jose Maria Balcazar, who's currently there, and we're going to find out exactly what these votes mean in the coming days, hopefully, as long as the voting is all being counted correctly and there's no irregularities in relation to that. And just to add, voting is actually mandatory for Peruvians aged between 18 and 70, and those who fail to cast their vote could actually incur a fine. So it's interesting that everyone is very much encouraged to go out and put their vote to the test. Okay, now our next story is on outlet France 24. So it's on the website. Pope Leo XIV begins landmark Algeria visit with a call for forgiveness. Now, yesterday I had mentioned this, that he is touring Africa over 11 days and has started in Algeria and was welcomed on Monday marking that he's the first pope to visit the country, which is a majority Muslim country, but it's something that he wanted to do because he wants to work with those within the country, especially in relation to focus on interfaith dialogue and peace. Now, he made a number of speeches, and during his speech in the capital city of Algiers, Pope Leo told political leaders that he had traveled to Africa as a witness to peace and hope that would so ardently desires as well. So the Pope will go to the region where St. Augustine was a bishop, formerly known as Hippo, now called Annaba, where he will celebrate Mass later on. And then after Algeria, Pope Leo will then go to Cameroon as well. So we know that he is going on a number of different visits to 4 African countries throughout his time there, and it's also to meet political leaders, the local Catholic communities, and hold interfaith events as well. And we know that the intensity of the tour is an indication of how important the Vatican is prioritizing its engagement with the continent, and Pope Leo wanting to reinforce the continent's role in the global Catholic life, showcasing it as a place of faith, resilience, and future growth. Now, just to add, US President Donald Trump has actually criticized the Pope as well, and said that he feels that Pope Leo is weak when it comes to diplomacy and foreign policy. And Pope Leo has said, because he's been critical of the war in Iran, and has actually added that he will continue to speak out loudly against war, looking to promote peace, promoting dialogue and multilateral relationships among the states to look for just solutions to problems, is what he said. Now, on that, we're now going to bump and skip over to another headline that is making its way throughout the day, and that's in relation to what Al Jazeera has put out there. Trump has deleted an image of himself as Jesus Christ-like savior after backlash. Now, the US President Trump is now facing a number of backlash because he posted this AI image, which I hope you guys can see a bit clearly if we just scroll down a little bit more, just showing himself as this figure on social media. And Pope Leo XIV also drew criticism from across the Christian and political spectrum in relation to the image that was shared on Monday of him healing the sick, as you can see there, the sick man, with the American flag and an eagle that represents America, and a number of soldiers and people beside the bedside. Now, it was later on deleted, showing him in a white robe, as I just mentioned, and healing. Now, it was posted after a separate message in which Trump criticized the Pope, calling him weak on crime and terrible for the foreign policy. Later, Trump told reporters that he actually thought that the posted image depicted him as a doctor. He added, "I make people better," is what he said, and said it had nothing to do with Jesus Christ, but more to do with the Red Cross as a Red Cross worker, which he supports, and only fake news could come up with that. But I'll let you come up with your own judgments in regards to that particular picture, but it has got increased backlash, and it's quite interesting that he has decided to take it down. If it was fake news and he was depicting himself as a doctor, it should be fine for him to leave up on his Truth social network, but that's not the case. He has actually taken it down. But anyway, that's your press roundup for now. I'm now going to take a quick break, and when I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Don't go anywhere.
Well, hello and welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you today. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Primetime with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories. Now we stay on the tensions around the Strait of Hormuz, and European countries are now working on proposals to secure global shipping and stabilize the situation around the key energy route.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where the UK and France are stepping up diplomatic efforts to secure one of the world's most critical routes, as U.S. President Donald Trump announces a blockade of shipping to and from Iranian ports has begun. Trump said Iran is doing, quote, absolutely no business, signaling a sharp escalation in tensions. That move comes amid mounting disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for roughly a fifth of global oil supply, raising fresh concerns over energy prices and supply chains. Against that backdrop, Britain and France will co-host talks this week on a possible multinational naval mission aimed at safeguarding commercial shipping. French President Emmanuel Macron stressed that the plan would be strictly defensive, separate from the conflict, and deployed only when conditions allow. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer warned the crisis is already driving up costs and hitting global trade, with knock-on effects for households and businesses. Crucially, this European-led effort signals a different approach from Washington. London has made it clear it will not join the U.S. blockade, instead pushing for a coordinated multinational plan focused on de-escalation and freedom of navigation. The talks build on momentum from last week's virtual meeting involving about 40 countries, including Canada, India, the UAE, and Germany, exploring ways to secure safe passage through the strait. While no formal coalition has been agreed, the discussions highlight a growing international push for a multilateral rather than U.S.-led response to one of the most critical flashpoints in global trade. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Diplomatic efforts to secure a broader agreement between the US and Iran appear to be gaining pace, with a new round of high-level talks expected soon. They are expected to take place in Islamabad, sources say, as Pakistan plays a key mediating role ahead of the current ceasefire deadline.
A new round of high-level talks between the United States and Iran could take place in Islamabad very soon, according to Pakistani officials. Preparations are underway, with both sides having already exchanged written positions on key demands and concessions. The participants have yet to be finalized, but the meeting is expected to involve senior officials. The talks follow earlier negotiations in Islamabad that ended without agreement, the highest level contact between the two sides in decades. US media reports say another face-to-face meeting is now being considered before the current ceasefire expires next week, though the White House has not commented on the plans. Officials say US President Donald Trump is pushing to secure a deal before his planned visit to China next month. Mediators from Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt are working to revive negotiations ahead of that deadline. Sources say the process is not at a deadlock, with both sides continuing to negotiate remaining differences. Geneva is also being considered as a possible alternative venue for further talks. Key differences remain, with Washington pushing for limits on Iran's nuclear program, while Tehran is seeking sanctions relief. The ceasefire could be extended to allow more time for a potential agreement.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio is set to join direct talks between Israel and Lebanon in Washington on Tuesday. The meeting at the State Department will bring together the Israeli and Lebanese ambassadors, marking the start of direct negotiations between the two sides. Officials say the talks will focus on securing a ceasefire and a broader political settlement. The discussions come in the middle of ongoing fighting in southern Lebanon, where Israel has expanded its air and ground operations. Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem has rejected that plan of talks involving Lebanese and Israeli representatives in Washington today, calling the negotiations pointless and urging Lebanon to cancel the meeting.
This negotiation is an act of capitulation and surrender, and would strip Lebanon of its strength. We call, while the opportunity still exists, for a historic and heroic stance by canceling this negotiating meeting.
بإلغاء هذا اللقاء التفاوضي.
And the war in Iran has caused many in the US to protest, especially in New York City, where police detained about 100 demonstrators after a sit-in outside the Manhattan offices. More than 300 people gathered to press lawmakers to back a Senate effort to block further US weapons sales to Israel. Protesters later moved onto a street nearby where police issued warnings before making arrests. The action was held ahead of a possible vote on military sales, with participants also opposing plans for additional US funding tied to the conflict. Now, Americans are also now feeling the strain as the Iran conflict pushes up costs at home, with energy markets under pressure and a fragile ceasefire coming into effect after 5 weeks of war.
Ships have begun reversing course in the Strait of Hormuz, following a US announcement of a blockade on Iranian ports, according to London-based maritime intelligence provider Lloyd's List. The disruption comes as Washington steps up mine-clearing operations in the region and accuses Tehran of failing to meet commitments to reopen the waterway. Pakistani-mediated talks in Islamabad failed to yield a breakthrough, leaving no clear end to the conflict in sight. Amid the stalemate, the economic fallout is hitting home. Small business owners are already feeling the burn as rising fuel costs squeeze their margins.
Everything is going up. Groceries, everything. And I just want to be one of those business owners that's able to give back, able to be fair and even around the board. And sometimes it does seem like it's a war as far as the customers, because they'll see things and they want it, but of course, they can't get it.
It isn't just the supply chain for goods, it's the fuel required to move them. At the pump, consumers are seeing prices move quickly, and some warn relief may not come fast, even if supply routes reopen.
I don't drive myself, but I mean, like, I went by I've noticed these things. Like, I think about even 2 weeks ago it was $3.50 a gallon, and a couple of days ago it was $4.19. So it's, and according to people who know about these things, even if they open up the strait tomorrow, there's going to be such a backlog. It's not like they open the strait and prices go down right away.
Beyond the economic pressure, the conflict is also fueling political frustration and uncertainty over where the war goes next.
The cost of everything that we do is going up, and the income for everything that we do is going down. And just availability of stuff is also getting to be a challenge. And then I've got so many friends that I've got customers who can't afford to shop with us anymore. I've got farmer friends who've gone bankrupt. What are we getting? We're ruining our position in the world. We're being the bad guys. We're ruining the world economy, and we're gaining nothing. So,
for now, Americans are left to balance the fast-moving headlines against the reality of their own balance sheets, waiting for a diplomatic breakthrough that has yet to arrive.
Turning to Europe, and Hungary's political landscape is shifting after a decisive election result, with a new leadership promising a reset in both domestic and foreign policy. Peter Magyar says his government will pursue pragmatic ties abroad while enforcing Hungary's place within Europe.
Hungary is entering a period of political transition after opposition leader Peter Magyar secured a landslide victory, ending the 16-year rule of Viktor Orban and signalling a broader shift in the country's direction. Magyar's win has been described as a political earthquake, lifting markets and raising hopes Budapest could unlock frozen European Union funds. He has pledged anti-corruption reforms and closer alignment with the EU, marking a clear break from Orban's confrontational approach. Europe will remain Hungary's core direction, according to Peter Magyar, who outlined a pragmatic foreign policy at his first major news conference. He said Hungary would maintain ties with Israel, assess EU decisions case by case, and uphold zero tolerance for anti-Semitism, adding that the election reflected a regime change and reaffirming that Hungary's place was, is, and will be in Europe.
And unlike before, it will not interfere in the internal affairs of any country, neither in the internal affairs of the Balkan countries, nor Spain, nor France, neither with money nor in any other way, nor in the internal affairs of Slovakia. We respectfully ask the same from all foreign countries, to view Hungary as a free, independent, sovereign, and at the same time European country, a country that is a member of the two most important and largest alliance systems, the European Union and NATO.
In Washington, J.D. Vance said the US can work well with Hungary's next leader, despite backing Viktor Orban earlier. Magyar also stressed the importance of strong ties with the US and NATO, but said he would not initiate contact with Donald Trump. Peter Magyar said Hungary will keep a practical relationship with Russia due to energy needs while also trying to diversify. He added he would urge Vladimir Putin to end the war and said better ties with Ukraine depend on restoring rights for Hungary's ethnic minority. The Kremlin said it hopes relations with Hungary remain practical. Hungarian PM-elect Peter Magyar on Monday urged Parliament to convene quickly to form a new government, aiming for a May 5th handover.
Now, staying on that topic of Hungary elections, we're going to take a deeper look at its win and what the TISA party leader Peter Magyar has promised a new era for the country after defeating Viktor Orban. But what does that really mean for Hungarians, for the EU and for Russia? Here to help me unpack this is Elmira Talip-Zadeh, a political analyst in the Caucasus Policy Analysis Center. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, nice to see you again. Thank you for your invitation and the opportunity to discuss the topic with you.
No problem. My first question is, we know that Peter Magyar has been very vocal about pursuing what's right. He wants to make sure that there's an end to corruption, ensure freedom of media, there's public funding for services is also put out there, and plus he's putting an end to the public TV and radio that have been, he described as puppets for propaganda and the former regime. Do you think that this is something that he can action, and why is it so important for Peter Magyar to kind of start implementing this?
Well, thank you for the question. In my view, Magyar's political strategy is highly calculated. He doesn't challenge the ideological foundation of the system. Instead, he attacks its moral legitimacy. His central message, Hungary can function without systematic corruption, resonates with a society that has grown tired of enriched patronage networks. Importantly, he mobilized support not through traditional opposition structures by bypassing them entirely. And even his rallies in some small towns and rural areas mirror the original grassroots strategy once employed, by the way, by Viktor Orban himself. At the same time, as we can see, TISA's ideological position is deliberately hybrid. It combines pro-European rhetorics with conservative policy elements. The party supports strict migration control, express skepticism towards military assistance to Ukraine, and remains ambiguous in social issues such as you mentioned, or even for some minor rights. This ideological flexibility allows it to consolidate a broad electoral base, including former Fidesz voters and disillusioned moderates. And even looking ahead, the central question is whether TISA can transition from a protest-driven movement into a governing force capable or delivering structural reforms. And even the risk is, as we can see, that having emerged with within the system, it may reproduce many of its constraints. However, its strength lies in its ability to re-legitimize state institutions without triggering systematic destabilization. And in a sense, we are not witnessing the end of the Orban system, but but is transformation. Magyars represent a second generation iteration, as we can see. It's less confrontational in style and more adaptive in rhetoric, but still grounded in the same structural realities.
And you mentioned the relationship that he had with Viktor Orban. We know that he was part of Viktor's party and the kind of ideology there, but before separating and parting ways. What does that tell us about Peter Magyar? Is he a younger version of Viktor Orban? Will he stick to some of his policies instead of getting rid of all of them? What does that tell us about that previous relationship?
Well, you know, his personal background further reinforces his embeddedness. As we know, his familial connection to Ferenc Magyar, the former president of Hungary, and his marriage to Judith Varga, she's a central figure in Viktor Orban's legal architecture, position him at the core of Hungary's political elite. And even the scandal surrounding Varga's resignation, linked to a controversial pardon case, act as a catalyst to Magyar's public political emergence. And this moment is critical, as we know it provided both moral justification and political opportunity. In my opinion, as we can see, the narrative of a black swan is analytically weak, because Magyar is not an outsider. He's a product of that system. He's a product of system of Viktor Orban's party that he is now critiques. And even his career trajectory is a textbook example of elite reproduction. Over 2 decades within Fidesz, position in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, involvement in European Union structures, and role inside the Prime Minister administration, his leadership of the party's youth wing is particularly important because it indicates not passive participation, but active, young involvement in personal reproduction of the ruling system. So even the Viktor Orban's immediate recognition of defeat and his personal phone call to congratulate Magyars further underline that his transition remains controlled, remains institutional and internal to the system. So I assume that this election of 2026 should be interpreted not as a simple change of government in Hungary, but also a systematic recalibration from within the ruling elite itself. Because this victory of Peter Magyar and his party represent a transfer of political legitimacy within the same ecosystem that had been dominated for over a decade by Viktor Orban.
Well, just on that, actually, you said that he's a product of this system. So are you saying that he's not going to be able to put much changes into place, which is what the Hungarian citizens have voted for? They really want a change of regime. They've had Viktor Orban for 16 years. We know that he's now, been defeated. People want that refreshing change. You can see that in the young people that voted. You can see that in the crowds that are very happy to see Peter Magyar out on the street. But what you just said is saying that he's a product of this whole system that is very unflexible in some ways. Do you think there will be a change of guards, as some people are calling it, or do you feel that this will just be Viktor Orban 2.0, for example?
Well, there will be many changes, but not the fully transformation of the regime. There will be change further the relation with the European Union, relations with the United States, especially relations with Republicans and Democrats, because as we know, the supportive tone associated with Barack Obama reflects the Democratic camp expectation of Magyar's leadership, that this expectation that Magyar's leadership should restore elements of real liberal democratic governance in Hungary. And this aligns with broader democratic priorities, including rule of law, institutional transparency, and other things. But there will be also a change in the Ukrainian case. In Ukrainian question, relation with Russia, especially in energy and political pragmatism, even when we're talking and coming to the region of South Caucasus, to the region of Turkic world, there will be a change, in my opinion, in relations with the Turkic world, with Azerbaijan, and even, on my view, Hungary's future engagement with the Turkic world represent a subtle but strategically important questions. Because under Viktor Orban, Hungary actively developed ties with Turkic states, as we know, positioning itself as a bridge between Europe and its geopolitical space. It observer status of the Organization of the Turkic States and its alignment with Azerbaijan mainly were the key elements of its policy. So I think even in the relations with Russia, as we can see, Hungary's relations with Russia under Peter Magyar's will continue to be sharp but structural relations, particularly in the energy sector. For example, as we know, Magyar has explicitly stated that Hungary will continue purchasing Russian oil. This is not a political preference. We should know this. It's an economic necessity rooted in geography and infrastructure. His acknowledgement that energy dependence will persist for the foreseeable future reflects a realistic assessment of constraints. And even his statement regarding Vladimir Putin that he will answer a phone call but not initiate one, it captures the essence of his approach. It's pragmatic, it's cautious, and devoid of symbolic. So we will be able to see some changes in the foreign policy.
Yes, and Ms. Talib Zadeh, I just want to also just bring in the EU now, because they're very excited by this new form of leadership, just because they've been having quite a strained relationship with Hungary, especially with Viktor Orban at the helm, and getting funding, especially for Ukraine. How will this new leader, Peter Magyar, benefit the bloc going forward? Will we see something different? We know that he has said that he wants to renew ties with the EU and also create a stronger relationship. What's your idea around that?
In my view, the widespread perception that Hungary is returning to Europe under Peter Magyar should be approached with analytical caution. The enthusiastic, as you say, reaction from European leaders including Ursula von der Leyen, Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz, Roberta Metsola, etc., it all reflects expectation rather than confirmed policy shifts. The messaging from Brussels is politically symbolic. Statements such as Hungary has chosen Europe or returns to the heart of Europe are less about Hungary's actual policy trajectory and more about European Union's desire to demonstrate internal cohesion after years of tension with Viktor Orban government. As we see, Magyar has positioned Hungary as a strong ally within the European Union and the NATO states. This indicates a clear intention to reduce confrontation and restore functional cooperation. However, it will be a mistake to interpret this as an unconditional alignment, because Magyar's political base includes voters who remain skeptical or excessive external influence and protective of national sovereignty. And importantly, TISA's program includes restoring rule of law, improving governance, and strengthening institutional credibility. This is a key demand from Brussels. And this creates foundation for
Sorry, Mr. Lizard. Yes, I want to just quickly get in this quick question for you before we let you go, just because of Hungary's relationship, not just with the EU, but also now with Russia, has changed significantly. We know that Putin was very close with Orban, and there were even rumors that the relationship was a little bit on the very controversial side of sharing of information when it came to what was going on in the EU. How will that relationship change now with Peter Magyar as the leader of the TISA party and now in government? Peter Magyar has mentioned that, you know what, he will accept a call from Russia, but what will that new relationship between the two leaders now look like?
Well, I think this mutual pragmatism suggests continuity, and Hungary will formally remain within the European Union sanctions framework while preserving channels for energy cooperation and negotiation with Moscow. At the same time, it is important to note that Magyar has openly stated that Hungary and Russia will not become friends, which marks a tonal shift compared to Viktor Orban's more personalized diplomacy. This indicates a move toward depersonalization and transactional relations based strictly on national interest rather than political affinity. I would argue that Magyar's policy represents maybe some realistic scenario. Because I think there will be changes in the Russian and Hungary's relations a lot, but in my opinion, in practice, it creates a dual-year policy when political alignment with Brussels on paper and economic pragmatism in implementation. This balance allows Hungary to minimize risks without sacrificing its core energy security priorities.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Talibzadeh, for joining me this morning and for going into detail in relation to this historic win and change in Hungary's elections and future.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Now turning to Russia, and Russian drone attacks have hit multiple regions of Ukraine, injuring at least 5 people and damaging residential areas. In the eastern region, a mass strike damaged more than 10 buildings and several vehicles, with fires reported across the city. Emergency crews say the fires have now been contained as residents were evacuated and assisted on site. In Kherson, 2 people were injured after a drone strike hit a civilian car, setting it on fire. US President Donald Trump has suggested Washington could turn its attention to Cuba after addressing current tensions involving Iran. Here's what he had to say, speaking to reporters at the White House.
Well, we're going to see with Cuba. Cuba's another story. Cuba's been a terribly run country for a long time. It's got a bad system. It's been very oppressive, as you know. And we have a lot of great Cuban Americans, all of whom just about voted for me. And they were treated very badly. In many cases, family members have been killed. They've been beaten up and mugged, and terrible things happened in Cuba. And Cuba's a failing nation, and we're going to do this, and we may stop by Cuba after we're finished with this. But Cuba is a nation that was just been horribly run for many years by Castro.
Now, a number of European countries, including France and Italy, have been seeking new ways to diversify their economy and looking to China as a key partner. Now, Spain is signalling a push for closer economic ties. For more, we go to Manu Makdoum, our correspondent in Beijing.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez is on a 5-day visit to China, his 4th trip to the country in just 4 years, highlighting Spain's push to strengthen economic and strategic relations with the world's 2nd largest economy. During the visit, Sanchez is expected to hold talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping, Premier Li Qiang, and other senior officials, with discussions focused on boosting trade, investment, and cooperation in sectors such as green energy, technology, and the digital economy. The repeated visits reflect a deliberate strategy by Madrid to maintain strong engagement with Beijing, even as other Western nations adopt a more cautious approach towards China. Spain has positioned China as a key economic partner, with bilateral trade exceeding $50 billion and a growing interest in Chinese investment across industrial and energy sectors. Sanchez has also used the trip to call for a greater Chinese role in global governance, urging Beijing to contribute more on issues including climate change, security, and global inequality, while emphasizing the need for a more balanced and cooperative international order. Sanchez's 4th visit in as many years highlights the continued high-level exchanges between China and Spain and shows Madrid's intent to pursue an independent foreign policy that balances transatlantic ties with deeper engagement in Asia. Manu Makdoum, A-News, Beijing.
Pope Leo XIV is continuing his visit to Algeria, where he has been meeting religious leaders and taking part in engagements aimed at promoting dialogue between faiths in the capital. He is on an 11-day trip off the continent of Africa. Here's more.
Pope Leo has continued his visit to Algeria with a stop at the Great Mosque of Algiers, where he was welcomed by Sheikh Mohammed Mamoun al-Kachimi al-Houchini. He toured the site, signed a commemorative message, and received a souvenir shield as part of a broader trip focused on interfaith dialogue. He later visited the Basilica of Our Lady of Africa in the capital, where he met members of the clergy and addressed attendees, calling for unity and reconciliation.
In a world where divisions and wars sow pain and death between nations, in communities and even within families, your united and peaceful life is a powerful sign. United, you spread fraternity, inspiring in those around you desires and feelings of communion and reconciliation, with a message all the more powerful and clear for being borne witness to in simplicity and humility.
He also used his address to criticize what he described as violations of international law by neo-colonial powers, speaking in the wider context of his Africa tour. The Pope said his visit is a message of peace and hope, noting Africa's major role in global Catholicism, even as Algeria remains overwhelmingly Muslim with a small Catholic community. He also met members of the missionary Augustinian Sisters in Algiers, a Catholic religious congregation present in 17 countries. At 70 years old, Pope Leo is undertaking a multi-country African tour covering Algeria, Cameroon, Angola and Equatorial Guinea, spanning 11 cities and towns and nearly 18,000 kilometres of travel.
The Pope will later be travelling to Angola on his 11-day tour of the continent of Africa, but the country has currently been experiencing severe flooding, damaging a key railway line, disrupting transport and affecting a major route for mineral exports.
Floodwaters have damaged sections of the Lobito railway corridor in Angola, forcing a suspension of operations after rivers burst their banks following heavy rains. Water rushed over rail lines, with tracks twisted and broken. The Lobito Atlantic Railway says flooding hit bridges over the Halo River between Cubal and Caimbambo, as well as a crossing over the Cavaco River near Benguela. By Monday, floodwaters were still flowing through communities, with homes inundated and belongings washed away. One resident described the scale of the destruction.
It's a tragedy. Other people were at the Cavaco wall, and by the time we realized it, the metal bridge had already collapsed. Then we got scared when the water started rising onto the deck and flooding our houses like rafts. As it reached our homes, many things were lost, rice, everything. There's no way to explain it.
The railway is a critical export route, carrying copper and cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo to the Atlantic port of Lobito and transporting goods in the opposite direction.
Now to Central America, and scientists in Panama are working to bring a critically endangered national symbol back from the brink of extinction as part of the efforts to restore fragile ecosystems. Here's more.
Bright yellow Panamanian golden frogs, once common in the wild, are now at the centre of a major conservation effort to restore their populations. At a research centre in Gamboa, scientists carefully feed and monitor the frogs before releasing them into controlled natural environments. The trial programme, led by the Panama Amphibian Rescue and Conservation Project, aims to reintroduce the species into the wild after years of decline caused largely by a deadly fungal disease. Around 100 frogs have been released in monitored enclosures, with researchers tracking their survival and behaviour. Project Director Dr. Roberto Ibanez says the goal is to build knowledge for larger-scale releases.
With these release trials, we are trying to learn more for the future, so that with the lessons learned, we will be able to carry out mass releases and restore populations that have disappeared from our natural areas.
But scientists say the biggest threat remains the chytrid fungus, which continues to persist in natural habitats.
As for the chytrid fungus, this fungus is still present in the wild. Once the fungus arrives at a site, it stays there because there are species that are tolerant or resistant to it and carry the fungus on their skin. The fungus grows on them but does not cause them any disease. And the fungus on their skin releases spores that infect other, more susceptible species found in the environment.
Despite the risks, conservation teams continue to raise the frogs in captivity, where even feeding them presents a challenge. Scientists say lessons from these trials, including earlier successful releases of other frog species, will be key to restoring populations of one of Panama's most iconic animals.
Over to a quick break now. When I return, we'll take a quick look at the regional headlines, and I'll be joined by a guest later to go through some of those stories. Stay with me. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's turn to the region for the key headlines there. Now, tensions around the Strait of Hormuz are intensifying, with Iran signaling it could tighten control over the key waterway, raising fresh concerns over energy markets and the risk of further escalation with the US. Our correspondent Tarash Alilu has more from Iran.
Iran's Speaker of Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, issued a statement on social platform X, strongly warning the Americans of extraordinary high fuel prices after U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to blockade the Strait of Hormuz to Iranian vessels. Ghalibaf said, "Enjoy the current growth figures. With such a blockade, soon you will be longing for gasoline at a price of $4 to $5. Also, a senior Iranian MP said that a draft bill has been tabled at the parliament on the control of the Strait of Hormuz by Iran. According to Abbas Goudarzi, a spokesperson for the parliament's presiding board, the bill proposes prohibition of the passage of vessels of countries with which Iran is in conflict through the strait. While the deadlock in Iran-US talks continues, Tehran holds its grip on the strategic waterway as its bargaining chip in the ceasefire talks held following the Israeli-US war on Iran, which broke out in February and lasted for 39 days. Revolutionary Guards Navy said in a statement on Sunday that it will consider military vessels approaching the Strait of Hormuz as ceasefire violation, the Guards' Sepah News website reported, saying that the waterway is under the smart management of Iran. It added that the strait is open only for the safe passage of non-military vessels. Turash Shiralilu, Tehran, Foreign News.
And just on that, Iran has now been able to come together, the citizens, where thousands of people have rallied in the capital in support of the Iranian government and protesting against the US move to block shipping linked to its ports. Crowds waved flags, chanted slogans, and joined in songs led by a speaker during the gathering. The demonstration comes as the Strait of Hormuz remains a major flashpoint following failed talks on Saturday. Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan are launching a new effort to protect the Caspian Sea with international backing aimed at boosting regional cooperation on environmental risks. Our correspondent Sevil Rajapova has more from Tashkent.
The World Bank has approved financing for the Blue in the Caspian Sea project, designed to strengthen regional cooperation on environmental protection. The initiative involves Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, focusing on pollution management and biodiversity conservation. The Global Environment Facility will allocate $11.7 million in grant funding, with the World Bank and the United Nations Environment Programme acting as implementing agencies. The program also includes additional funding for preparatory work, environmental safeguards and coordination among participating countries. Earlier, Kazakhstan allocated about $2.4 million from its reserves for the Kazakhstan Scientific Research Institute of the Caspian Sea, according to the government press service. Meanwhile, Azerbaijan has about $1.9 million allocated within a UN Habitat program for climate adaptation along the Caspian coast, including national planning and resilience projects, according to a UN Habitat project proposal submitted to the Adaptation Fund. The initiative is expected to improve environmental monitoring, strengthen pollution control systems, and support biodiversity conservation across the Caspian Sea basin. Participating countries will also work on developing joint approaches to managing marine resources and reducing environmental risks. The program aims to help the region meet commitments under the Tehran Convention and enhance long-term cooperation on protecting the Caspian Sea ecosystem. It is Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Time for a quick break now. When I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Don't go anywhere.
Hello and welcome to Primetime. What a show we've got lined up for you today. In a complex world, clarity is power. Two hours live, diplomacy dissected in a spin-free environment. That's Prime Time with me, Guy Schoen, weekdays on A News.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are recording
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv, Washington, London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro,
Beijing,
Bangkok, Tbilisi,
Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Hello, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and if you're just joining me, I'm the host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. Here are your headlines. Trump actions blockade in the Strait of Hormuz and says Iran wants a deal very badly. Lebanon enters talks with Israel in Washington, but Hezbollah says it's pointless. And Pope Leo starts his Africa tour in Algeria and calls for peace in the Middle East. Now let's take a look at the stories making the front pages this morning, and we head straight to the Independent website where they're talking about Prince Harry and Meghan, who have arrived in Australia for a low-key, privately funded visit. So they've just landed. They've actually gone to see a local hospital there. This is where the pictures are coming in from. But the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have arrived for a 4-day tour. They're combining the visits with charitable causes alongside private engagements. Now, the couple are no longer working as royals, and and are visiting in a private capacity. Today, this is where they are. They met with patients and medics at a children's hospital in Melbourne, along with military veterans and their families and survivors of families of violence. Now, the schedule also reflects the commercial aspect of the trip, where Prince Harry is actually due to speak and give a keynote speech later on, and then Meghan will hold an in-person conversation at Women Only Girls Weekend in Sydney, which is hosted by the producers of Her Best Life podcast. It is Harry and Meghan's first time in Australia since they were last there in 2018, when they spent around 9 days in the country a few months after they got married. Now, after stepping down as working royals in January 2020 and giving up their titles as His and Her Royal Highnesses, Prince Harry and Meghan are now visiting as private citizens and say that the trip is privately funded. So just some pictures there that we wanted to show you and to let you know about that story, which will be continuing throughout the day and over the course of their time in Australia. Now let's go to the BBC website in regards to what's taking place in Peru. And Peru election drags into second day after ballot delivery fiasco. Now the results for the general election have been delayed. They were supposed to be counted and hopefully reveal who the main winner would be, but after tens of thousands of people are unable to vote due to technical and logistical problems at several polling stations, the electoral authorities decided to give an extra day extension to more than 50,000 voters who could not cast their ballots on the Sunday. But a preliminary count shows that half of the votes were cast, putting Conservative candidate Keiko Fujimori slightly ahead of the right-wing former mayor, which is Rafael Lopez Aliaga. Now, all candidates are far short of the 50% of votes they need to win outright, making a runoff very much inevitable between the top two candidates. And as you can see here, the reason for this is because Peru has actually had 8 presidents in the last 10 years, and the BBC has listed it out here. It's a very interesting time that they have had a number of political instability because of that. And the latest one to step down was Jose Geri, which we spoke about on the program earlier this year. He stepped down in February 2026, and there's currently an interim president at the moment as well that's currently looking after the country in regards to its political framework. Now, just to also mention, there we are, Jose Geri, July 2025 to February 2026. He was in post for 131 days, and now Jose Maria Balcazar is currently the interim president before they find out who the next leader is going to be. Now, voters who have experienced problems in Lima and at polling stations abroad, abroad, are now able to hopefully cast their votes and find out exactly who that new person leader will be in. But there'll definitely likely be a runoff in June, as mentioned. And just to also add that it's mandatory voting for Peruvians aged between 18 and 70. Otherwise, you could be faced with a fine. So just to note there that Peru is very much encourages, is quite strong and heavy-handed when it comes to making sure their citizens vote in its elections. Okay, now let's go to the last story, and that's in relation to Iran and Lebanon, and that's on The Guardian, and that's going to be everywhere today because of what Donald Trump has said over the past few days and hours. So, Middle East crisis, Hezbollah urges Lebanon to pull out of talks with Israel, blockade of the Strait of Hormuz begins. Now, Donald Trump said Iran wants to make a deal, and that it will not come to any agreement that means that Tehran to hold nuclear weapons, which is its main sticking point. But Iran said on Monday that it could suspend its uranium enrichment program for 5 years, which Trump has said that he is rejecting and insists that it be 20 years instead. Now, that was according to a number of officials talking to us about that. Now, the blockade in the Hormuz has been actioned as of Monday, and ships transitioning in the Strait of Hormuz has now, those ports and in that area, has now definitely decreased and lowered. And we know that there's a number of things that the two leaders are hoping to get out of this. Donald Trump hopes to put pressure on Iran and hope that they will come to the table with a more agreeable deal that both sides can agree to and stop the war in Iran. And just on this, Lebanon is also hosting or having talks in Washington later with Israel in relation to the fighting that is taking place in southern Lebanon. We know there's been a number of attacks and killings in relation to this. Israel said it's because of Hezbollah that is there, and Hezbollah has actually spoken out and said that these talks are pointless and feels that Lebanon should not go ahead with them. However, we will keep you up to date with what's going on. We now have a report that goes into further detail in regards to these talks and what is taking place in relation to Iran and the US. Let's take a look at this.
Tensions are rapidly escalating in the Middle East as Donald Trump orders a sweeping US naval blockade targeting Iranian ports. Trump warned that any Iranian vessels approaching US forces in the Strait of Hormuz would be immediately eliminated, signaling a major escalation in military posture. According to United States Central Command, the blockade began Monday, restricting all maritime traffic to and from Iranian ports, while allowing passage for ships not linked to Iran. Iran has responded with strong warnings. Officials say their armed forces are on maximum alert, vowing a decisive response to any aggression. Tehran has also accused Washington of piracy as protests erupted in the capital. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu expressed support for the US move, saying Israel is closely coordinating with Washington and warning a fragile ceasefire could soon collapse. US Vice President J.D. Vance said the path forward depends on Iran, urging Tehran to abandon nuclear ambitions and reopen the strait fully to global trade.
Is that we need to see the Straits of Hormuz fully open. And this is frankly one of the things where the Iranians tried to move the goalposts during the negotiation. We made very clear that that's unacceptable. We came to the negotiation saying the United States, what we've given here is a ceasefire. We've stopped bombing the country. What we expect the Iranians to give up is a full reopening of the Straits of Hormuz. We have seen, as the president has said, some significant uptick in traffic coming through the Straits of Hormuz. That's good for the global economy.
Despite rising tensions, NATO allies, including Britain and France, have declined to participate in the blockade, instead pushing for diplomatic efforts to reopen the critical shipping route, which carries roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply. As both sides dig in, concerns are mounting over the risk of wider conflict and its impact on global energy markets.
Diplomatic efforts to secure a broader agreement between the US and Iran appear to be gaining pace, with a new round of high-level talks expected soon. Talks are expected to take place in Islamabad, sources say, as Pakistan plays a key mediating role ahead of the current ceasefire deadline.
A new round of high-level talks between the United States and Iran could take place in Islamabad very soon, according to Pakistani officials. Preparations are underway, with both sides having already exchanged written positions on key demands and concessions. The participants have yet to be finalized, but the meeting is expected to involve senior officials. The talks follow earlier negotiations in Islamabad that ended without agreement, the highest level contact between the two sides in decades. US media reports say another face-to-face meeting is now being considered before the current ceasefire expires next week, though the White House has not commented on the plans. Officials say US President Donald Trump is pushing to secure a deal before his planned visit to China next month. Mediators from Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt are working to revive negotiations ahead of that deadline. Sources say the process is not at a deadlock, with both sides continuing to negotiate remaining differences. Geneva is also being considered as a possible alternative venue for further talks. Key differences remain, with Washington pushing for limits on Iran's nuclear program, while Tehran is seeking sanctions relief. The ceasefire could be extended to allow more time for a potential agreement.
Now turning to Israel and Lebanon, who are set to hold rare direct talks in Washington today, marking their highest level meeting in decades. Our correspondent from Washington brings us this.
Israel and Lebanon will hold direct meetings between their ambassadors for the first time in a very long time here in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday morning, as direct negotiations between the two countries officially kicks off. Israel and the Iranian-backed militia group Lebanese Hezbollah have been locked in bitter fighting that has recently seen a major ground incursion by the Israeli Defense Forces into southern Lebanon. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will host Israeli ambassador to the U.S. Michael Yechiel and the Lebanese ambassador Nada Hamadeh in what will be the highest level direct meeting between an Israeli and Lebanese official since the early 1990s. The talks will focus on the possibility of a ceasefire and the longer-term disarmament of Hezbollah. The talks could also pave the way for later discussions on a peace deal between Lebanon and Israel. In the lead up to the meeting, the Trump administration have asked Israel reportedly for a pause in its ongoing strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon. State Department officials told reporters in Washington that Hezbollah's recent actions against Israel are endangering the security of all Lebanese people, and that Hezbollah's actions are the reason why the Lebanese and Israeli governments are now engaging in direct high-level diplomatic talks brokered by the United States. That's the view here in Washington. American diplomats say that the direct talks will focus on guaranteeing long-term security for Israel's northern border and for the necessary steps that have to be taken to support the government of Lebanon's capacity to operate without the political and military interference of Hezbollah and its sovereignty. Hezbollah still maintains significant influence over Lebanese political life. The United States have designated Hezbollah as a foreign terrorist organization and sees the Iranian-backed proxy as a major threat to regional stability in the Middle East. Ubi Shubander, A News, Washington.
Hungary's political landscape is shifting after a decisive election result, with a new leadership promising a reset in both domestic and foreign policy. Peter Magyar says his government will pursue pragmatic ties abroad while reinforcing Hungary's place within Europe.
Hungary is entering a period of political transition after opposition leader Peter Magyar secured a landslide victory, ending the 16-year rule of Viktor Orban and signalling a broader shift in the country's direction. Magyar's win has been described as a political earthquake, lifting markets and raising hopes Budapest could unlock frozen European Union funds. He has pledged anti-corruption reforms and closer alignment with the EU, marking a clear break from Orban's confrontational approach. Europe will remain Hungary's core direction, according to Peter Magyar, who outlined a pragmatic foreign policy at his first major news conference. He said Hungary would maintain ties with Israel, assess EU decisions case by case, and uphold zero tolerance for anti-Semitism, adding that the election reflected a regime change and reaffirming that Hungary's place was, is, and will be in Europe.
And unlike before, it will not interfere in the internal affairs of any country, neither in the internal affairs of the Balkan countries, nor Spain, nor France, neither with money nor in any other way, nor in the internal affairs of Slovakia. We respectfully ask the same from all foreign countries, to view Hungary as a free, independent, sovereign, and at the same time European country, a country that is a member of the two most important and largest alliance systems, the European Union and NATO.
In Washington, J.D. Vance said the U.S. can work well with Hungary's next leader, despite backing Viktor Orban earlier. Magyar also stressed the importance of strong ties with the US and NATO, but said he would not initiate contact with Donald Trump. Peter Magyar said Hungary will keep a practical relationship with Russia due to energy needs while also trying to diversify. He added he would urge Vladimir Putin to end the war and said better ties with Ukraine depend on restoring rights for Hungary's ethnic minority. The Kremlin said it hopes relations with Hungary remain practical. Hungarian PM-elect Peter Magyar on Monday urged Parliament to convene quickly to form a new government, aiming for a May 5th handover.
Turning to the US, and the US military said it killed 2 people in a strike on a vessel in the Eastern Pacific Ocean on Monday, claiming the targets were involved in narco-trafficking operations. The U.S. Southern Command, responsible for military operations in Latin America and the Caribbean, said in a social media post that the vessel was transiting along known narco-trafficking routes and alleged that the vessel was operated by designated terrorist organizations. The U.S. government has faced widespread scrutiny over the strikes, with accusations of carrying out extrajudicial killings. US President Donald Trump has suggested Washington could turn its attention to Cuba after addressing current tensions involving Iran. Here's what he had to say, speaking to reporters at the White House.
Well, we're going to see with Cuba. Cuba's another story. Cuba's been a terribly run country for a long time. It's got a bad system. It's been very oppressive, as you know. And we have a lot of great Cuban Americans, all of whom just about voted for me. And they were treated very badly. In many cases, family members have been killed. They've been beaten up and mugged, and terrible things happened in Cuba. And Cuba's a failing nation, and we're going to do this, and we may stop by Cuba after we're finished with this. But Cuba is a nation that was just been horribly run for many years by Castro.
Peru's presidential election remained unresolved on Monday after voting was extended due to logistical failures. Early results showed Keiko Fujimori leading, followed by Rafael Lopez Aliaga, though the race for second place remained tight, with about 62% of ballots counted. A June runoff appears likely in the deeply fragmented race. The election comes amid ongoing political instability, with Peru set to choose its 9th president in a decade. Pope Leo is continuing his visit to Algeria, where he has been meeting religious leaders and taking part in engagements aimed at promoting dialogue between faiths in the capital. Let's take a look at the report.
Pope Leo has continued his visit to Algeria with a stop at the Great Mosque of Algiers, where he was welcomed by Sheikh Mohammed Mamoun al-Kachimi al-Hochini. He toured the site, signed a commemorative message and received a souvenir shield as part of a broader trip focused on interfaith dialogue. He later visited the Basilica of Our Lady of Africa in the capital, where he met members of the clergy and addressed attendees, calling for unity and reconciliation.
In a world where divisions and wars sow pain and death between nations, in communities and even within families, your united and peaceful life is a powerful sign. United, you spread fraternity, inspiring in those around you desires and feelings of communion and reconciliation, with a message all the more powerful and clear for being borne witness to in simplicity and humility.
He also used his address to criticize what he described as violations of international law by neo-colonial powers, speaking in the wider context of his Africa tour. The Pope said his visit is a message of peace and hope, noting Africa's major role in global Catholicism, even as Algeria remains overwhelmingly Muslim with a small Catholic community. He also met members of the missionary Augustinian Sisters in Algiers, a Catholic religious congregation present in 17 countries. At 70 years old, Pope Leo is undertaking a multi-country African tour covering Algeria, Cameroon, Angola and Equatorial Guinea, spanning 11 cities and towns and nearly 18,000 kilometers of travel.
You're watching Daybreak on A News. We're going to take a quick break, so make sure you don't go anywhere.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. One important note. To fear. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are recording
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv, Washington, London,
Moscow,
Kiev, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Welcome back and thank you for watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now we're going to turn quickly to the region and focus in on Azerbaijan and Armenia and the peace process, which is increasingly being linked to economic opportunity. Now there's been recent remarks by Nikol Pashinyan, the president in Armenia, to highlight expectations that normalization with Azerbaijan could boost Armenia's economy, expand trade and reduce regional isolation. Now to discuss this further and joining me is to open this up a bit more is Murad Maradov, Deputy Director at the Topshubashov Center in Baku. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Good morning, Murad. Thank you so much for joining me. My first question in regards to all of this is, to what extent can economic incentives genuinely sustain political momentum toward peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia?
Of course, we right now are at the critical juncture in the normalization process of Azerbaijan and Armenia for a few reasons. Well, first of all, of course, it's the upcoming elections in Armenia, where the opposition parties have regularly questioned the value of the peace process for Armenia, even though not directly, but implying that the peace treaty initiated last year doesn't respond to Armenian interests, and trying also revoke the Karabakh issue, which, as President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan have also recently emphasized, is closed. And of course, since this revanchist, or at least the critical rhetoric towards the process, finds certain support among many Armenians, and the victory of the Pashinyan government is not guaranteed. Secondly, of course, the process has been developing quite quickly, and from the first bilateral contacts in the end of 2023, when we have just 2.5 years past, even less. And of course, still the parties need to develop trust, which is quite low. And this contact very important in terms of sending a message that this trip is possible, and that moreover they can be held in a very respectful and friendly atmosphere.
And also, how might an economic alignment then and infrastructure redefine the South Caucasus as a space of cooperation rather than competition?
Well, I think economic and infrastructural cooperation can have very critical significance, in the region, where traditionally ideological and say nationalistic narratives have so often trumped more pragmatic arguments. And as we have heard during this two-day meeting, Armenian side has a number of concerns which can be resolved within the framework of a more, say, intense, full-fledged, normalization process. For example, one of them is the gas import. So, right now, Armenia mostly imports the gas from Russia. And of course, it is subject to political pressure, given, say, the recent unease between Armenian and Russian leaders, and also which was emphasized during the latest meeting in Moscow. Well, the expectation that, for example, Moscow may start to exert certain energy pressure on Armenia, curbing maybe exports, or limiting them at some point, or raising prices. But so that's why Armenian side has been talking, say, about the possibility of reconstructing the pipeline from Kazakh and Azerbaijan to Yerevan and Armenia, which already existed in the Soviet times. Well, another issue is the use of Armenians, let's say, of the road infrastructure. Well, Trip corridor, first of all, is aimed at connecting mainland Azerbaijan with Nakhchivan, so the shortest route. But at the same time, Armenian experts emphasize that in terms of communication opening, also, well, they will gain a lot, let's say, by gaining access from, let's say, this core part of Armenia, the northern part, Suna-Hichevan to the south, province of Sunik, because the latter is connected to the north via very hard mountainous roads, which are often, let's say, impassable during, let's say, cold season.
Mr. Maradol, can you hear me?
This connectivity.
Hi there.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I need to just get to another question, only because we don't have much time and you're going into so much depth for us, which is brilliant. But I wanted to just bring it back to something in regards to the TRIP project. And how concerned do you think Azerbaijan should be, or perceived by a perceived delay in the implementation of the TRIP project, just because of what we're seeing next door in relation to Iran and the US?
The TRIP itself, the part of the Skolsvay, is situated on Armenian territory, and it's basically Yerevan, which created a joint enterprise with the United States in order to build this part. And of course, if the tensions in the Middle East intensify and the war in Iran drags on, it may create, of course, a significant uncertainty regarding U.S. presence in the region, on the ground, and building a road, basically the direct vicinity of Iranian border. Of course, it's quite a difficult situation for both sides. But the thing is that, Azerbaijan already has significant know-how in terms of building roads and railways. And it's emphasized that, countries in the worst scenario may also agree, to resolve the issue bilaterally. As they have done in the last couple of years. With the most political issues. And I'm also sure, that in this case, there will be investors willing, to come in. But of course, it's also contingent, on the U.S. readiness, to pursue the project, despite odds.
I see. And just finally, what is specific about the unique Peace Bridge, that initiative, how does that differ to other projects and peace building formats, would you say?
Sorry?
The Peace Bridge Initiative. How is that different to other peace-building initiatives that Armenia and Azerbaijan are having?
Well, I think it's a very important combination of, the genuine interaction between the civil societies, but also at the same time, matched by the respective governments. And, as many participants, like they have been noticing, like for decades, in between the two wars, between Azerbaijan and Armenia, there were many meetings in the sky, but they mostly remained confined to the narrow circle of people who participated. And those people may have made brilliant, offers and shown a lot of willingness to talk and compromise. I mean, they've never made it into the real agenda on the ground. And so right now what we have is the two governments are really committed to the peace agenda. And this is why the civil society supports this process, feel uniquely empowered, to speak their voice and to contribute to this historic shift. But of course, as I also already mentioned, a lot will depend on the outcomes of the elections and whether, let's say, the future government of Armenia will continue to support it. If they do, I'm pretty sure the process will face brighter days ahead.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Mr. Muradov, and for going through that with me. It's been great to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, if you've made it this far, I have a treat in store for you. Something that might warm your heart, a dancing politician. Now, stay with me, because it's not every day that there is a change of regime, but for Hungarians, this came on Monday after the Teaser Party had a landslide win, bringing an end to former Prime Minister Viktor Orban's 16 years in power, and one politician encapsulated how many felt about that historic win. Let's take a look at this. That's what you get, a dancing politician who is ecstatic that his party has won. I don't know if that was me. I might have to do some kind of strange dance as well, especially doing his dad moves. I really did like it. But anyway, thank you for joining me this morning and for seeing all the headlines there. We'll be covering a number of stories throughout the day, so make sure you stay tuned to A News, and I'll see you back tomorrow on Wednesday to go through the rest of the headlines. Take care.